Welcome back to Reddit Tales by Uncle Sammy. I see you, I appreciate you, and I'm thankful you subscribed and keep showing up. This space is built on your insights. Leave your thoughts and lessons below. Now, cue the tension, cue the truth, let's get into it. Before you hear this one, hold on to a simple rule. When somebody disappears, comes back without urgency, and talks to you like your pain is an inconvenience, the missing week is not the first problem. The first problem is contempt. In this story, that contempt showed up before the full truth did, and that is usually the part people talk themselves out of seeing. The front door opened on the seventh night at 1:18 a.m., and my wife stepped inside, carrying cold air with her like she had just borrowed it from a harbor. I was still sitting in the same chair near the radiator where I had spent half the week dozing, waking, calling, and listening for footsteps on our row house steps in West Baltimore. My name is Micah Tatum. I was 38 then, a public school music teacher, with a habit of polishing my glasses when I was anxious. My wife, Corinne, set her weekend bag down, looked at me once, and said, "Be happy I even came back." Before we go any further, tell me right now in the comments, if your spouse vanished for a week and came back talking like that, would you stay or walk away? And if you want more raw relationship stories like this, make sure you like, share, and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. There are sentences that end a marriage before the paperwork catches up. That was one of them. She did not say hello. She did not ask whether I had slept. She did not explain why her phone went dead after Tuesday morning or why her sister had sworn she was not with her. She just stood there in a cream trench coat, with rain dry on the shoulders and somebody else's cologne sitting on her like a handprint. I noticed the smell before I noticed her face. Cedar, pepper, something expensive and sharp. Not mine. I had been afraid she was hurt. In one breath, I understood she had simply been elsewhere. I stood up so slowly it surprised her. For months, I had been moving around Corinne like a man trying not to startle a bird on a wire. I watched my tone, softened my questions, delayed my disappointments. That night, something in me sat down for good. "I am happy," I said. "Now I know you had a choice." She gave me that sideways look she used when she wanted me to feel provincial, like I was too simple to keep up with her private logic. "Do not do this tonight, Micah." But tonight was all I had been given for 7 days. Corinne had a way of making lateness feel glamorous. If she ran an hour behind, it was because she was caught in momentum. If she ignored a text, it was because she was protecting her energy. She worked in donor relations at a museum downtown, and had started talking in polished phrases that sounded lifted from grant dinners and networking brunches. I used to find it funny. Then I found it exhausting. That night, in our narrow living room with the old upright piano against one wall and the crocheted throw from my aunt over the sofa, she crossed her arms and said, "I needed room to think." "You had room," I said. "You had 7 days." I did not raise my voice. I had spent the entire week imagining hospitals, car accidents, a body pulled from the Patapsco, some stranger knocking with bad news. I had called 2 precincts and 3 emergency rooms before shame made me stop explaining that my wife was probably not the kind of missing person people rush for. Corinne tilted her head. "You always make things dramatic." That sentence almost made me laugh. There is nothing like being told you are dramatic by the person who vanished and returned smelling like a man you have never met. I reached for my coat on the banister. It was January, and the house still held the dry heat and soup smell from the split pea pot I had made on Wednesday, because it gave my hand something to do. Corinne watched me button the coat and finally seemed unsure. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Out," I said. "We can talk when you are ready to be honest." She gave a short, dismissive laugh. "You're going to leave your own house because I took some space?" I picked up my keys from a bowl by the door. "No, I am leaving because you came back arrogant." The first decision I made that could have gone another way was to walk out instead of arguing until dawn. I could have stayed there and demanded details, names, dates, all the ugly inventory people think will make betrayal easier to understand. But I knew Corinne. She did her best work in confusion. If I stayed, she would turn the night into a fog of half-confessions and accusations about my tone. So I left. I drove east with no music on, past the all-night carryout with a bulletproof glass and the bus stop shelter rattling in the wind. and checked into a hotel near the Inner Harbor. Hotel rooms are useful when your own life has become too crowded with meaning. Mine had a brown chair by the window, a humming heater, and a print of sailboats that looked mass-produced and relieved to be unnoticed. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my phone. 42 missed calls to Corinne over 7 days. 9 texts from me that started worried and ended controlled. From her friend Anika saying she just needs time. Time for what? A married woman in her 30s does not vanish like a teenager proving a point. By then, worry had already hardened into something less frantic and more exact. The truth is the week did not begin with her disappearance. It began months earlier, in smaller, easier-to-excuse pieces. Corinne had started guarding her phone in October. Screen down, then face tucked away whenever I walked near. She began coming home with makeup she had not left in. She subtly cared about perfume layering, a phrase I had never heard until she said it while standing in our tiny bathroom, dabbing oil on her. Wrists like she was preparing for a spotlight. I told myself she was changing jobs in her mind before changing jobs on paper. I told myself marriage had seasons. I teach music to middle school students, which means my life runs on repetition, patience, and listening for wrong notes inside a whole room full of noise. By November, I heard the wrong notes at home. Corinne stopped asking about my day unless the answer could be told in one sentence. She no longer sat at the piano bench while I practiced for Sunday service at New Light Baptist. She used to turn pages for me even when I did not need it. Then she started spending Thursday nights with donors, Fridays with the girls, Saturdays recovering. I kept adjusting the absences as if accommodation were love. The second decision I made that could have gone another way happened 3 weeks before she vanished. Our pastor's wife, Sister Evelyn, had cornered me after Bible study while I was helping stack folding chairs in the fellowship hall. Evelyn was not nosy. She was observant in a way that made excuses feel childish. She asked, "Baby, is everything all right in your house?" I had the chance then to tell the truth. Instead, I smiled and said work had us both tired. I chose privacy over honesty because I was still trying to protect the image of a marriage already turning brittle in my hands. In the hotel that first night, I called Corinne's mother because she was practical and rarely sentimental enough to lie well. Mrs. Baines answered on the second ring with her television low in the background. "Micah?" she said, and there was a pause that told me she already knew something I did not. "Did she tell you where she's been?" I asked. Another pause, then a sigh. "No, baby." Her voice had that weary church mother softness that only comes when disappointment has been around a while. But I told her this was no way to handle a husband. The sentence landed like cold water. "So you knew she left?" I asked. Mrs. Baines took a breath. I knew she said she needed space. I did not know she meant she would disappear. I looked out at the black water beyond the hotel parking lot, lights wobbling on it from somewhere unseen. Was she safe? I asked. "Yes," she said too carefully. "Not yes, she is safe. Yes," as if the fact had already passed through her hands. I thanked her and hung up before my voice could do anything embarrassing. It is a quiet humiliation to learn your fear was never shared by the person who caused it. The next morning, I did something I had never done in 9 years with Corinne. I opened every joint account statement and read it like a stranger audits a business he plans to leave. At first, the numbers looked normal. Mortgage, utilities, my student loan, groceries, gas. Then the side roads appeared. Cash withdrawals from neighborhoods nowhere near her office. Dinner tabs at places she said were too overpriced for Baltimore. A jewelry store charge in Harbor East that definitely had not ended up on me. 2 boutique hotel stays listed under dates when she told me she was leading donor events. Money turned suspicion into structure. By noon, the structure had become a pattern. Same zip code, same Fridays. Small transactions that would slide beneath the notice of somebody who still believed explanations were coming. I printed the statements in the hotel business center, while a convention attendee nearby argued into his headset about seafood catering. It felt obscene that ordinary life was still happening. I made a neat pile and clipped it together with the hotel's cheap black binder clip. Then I called a lawyer my cousin Rochelle had used years earlier, not because I want to perform strength, because facts without process just become new ways to torment yourself. Her name was Dana Pike, and she had a voice like she did not owe any extra energy. We met that afternoon in her office near Charles Street, above a barbershop that smelled like talc and bay rum. Men drifted in and out downstairs while I told a stranger the story of my marriage in bullet points. Disappearance, lies, financial irregularities, possible affair. Dana did not widen her eyes or offer pity. She asked dates, accounts, whether we had children, whether there had been any threats. You do not need certainty to prepare, she said. You need enough truth to stop being played. I liked her immediately for not insulting me with false comfort. She told me to document everything and keep communication brief. She told me not to accuse Corinne in writing if I was not ready to back it up. She told me if Corinne came home hostile, I should not let her pull me into performative rage that could later be used against me. People who behave badly often become offended when consequences arrive. Dana said, they will call those consequences cruelty. I wrote that down on the back of a student concert program from my coat pocket and kept it for months. By the time Corinne walked in at 1:18 a.m. the next night and told me to be happy she had come back, I already had the first outline of my next steps. That is why leaving the house felt less dramatic than inevitable. At the hotel, after I sat down, her texts finally started. Not worried texts, not apologetic ones. You left in the middle of a conversation. This is childish. We both need to own our part. That last one was classic Corinne, a plea for shared blame before shared facts. I did not answer. Silence was the first boundary that belonged entirely to me. On Sunday morning, I returned to the house while she was at brunch or church or wherever she now went to be seen. Our block was wet from overnight rain, row house steps shining dark, somebody down the street scraping ice off a windshield with a library card. Inside, the house looked the same in the insulting way houses do after life changes. The framed wedding picture still sat on the mantel. The ceramic bowl from our anniversary trip to Asheville still held clementines. I packed documents first. Birth certificate, passport, tax returns, my grandfather's metronome from 1963. Then my clothes. The metronome mattered more than the suits. My grandfather had played piano in a jazz trio in Detroit before arthritis bent his fingers and church steadied his weekends. When he died, my father gave me that walnut metronome and said, "Keep time for yourself." I had ignored the sentence for years because it sounded like something people embroider onto pillows. In that house, with my marriage listing under me, it sounded different. I wrapped the metronome in one of Corinne's old silk scarves, then unwrapped it and used my own t-shirt instead. I did not want my keeping time tied to her softness anymore. Corinne came home before I finished. She stood in the doorway to our bedroom in camel boots and a fitted black sweater, carrying a pastry box from Marisol's bakery like we were still a couple who solved tension with sweets. "What are you doing?" she asked, though the answer was zipped and folded in plain view. "Making space," I said. She set the pastry box down hard enough to dent the icing. "You are really doing this over 1 week?" There was again her talent for shrinking a wound until your reaction looked unstable. I kept packing socks as if they required my full concentration. "Not 1 week," I said. 1 week made visible by the months before it. Corinne leaned against the doorframe and crossed her ankles, studying me as if I were a difficult donor who needed the right phrase. "I was overwhelmed," she said. "You've been absent too, Micah. Maybe not physically, but you check out." That part hurt because it was not entirely false. The school musical had swallowed my evenings in November. I had spent Saturdays arranging music for the youth choir. I was home, but often with a mind still sorting obligations. Partial truth is the sharpest tool dishonest people use. I sat on the bed and let that sting without letting it steer. "You were lonely," I said. "Then say that. Say you were angry. Say you wanted counseling. Say you wanted out. You do not disappear and return disrespectful." Her jaw tightened. "You always want a perfect process." "No," I said. "I want basic decency." For the first time, her expression flickered. Not remorse. Calculation interrupted. She was assessing whether the old methods still worked on me. Tears? Blame? Seduction? Fatigue? Corinne had spent years making emotional weather, and then acting like she could not control the forecast. I had finally brought an umbrella. Did you think I would just be here waiting forever? I asked. The room was quiet except for the radiator knocking and a siren somewhere toward Edmondson Avenue. She looked away first. I knew you would still be here, she said, and I will never forget how honest that sounded. Not romantic, not grateful, simply assumed. The sentence reached backwards and rewrote years of our marriage in one cruel stroke. She believed my steadiness was furniture, dependable, uncomplaining, already arranged to suit the room. My chest felt hot, but my mind got colder. That, I said, is the actual problem. I told her we would speak Tuesday evening after work, with specifics. No midnight circles. No vague philosophies about fulfillment. Come ready to tell the truth or not at all, I said. She rolled her eyes at that, but her hand trembled slightly when she picked up the pastry box again. After she left the room, I carried 2 suitcases to my car and drove them back to the hotel. The city was bright with a brittle winter sun. Men gathered outside the corner store, discussing the Ravens, as if football could still explain life. I envied them for having a public grief with rules. Tuesday, I got the house early and set our dining table like I was preparing for a meeting nobody wanted, but everyone would remember. Statements in one folder, hotel receipts in another, a timeline written in my own careful teacher handwriting. By then, Dana had helped me draft preliminary separation paperwork. I put that in a 3rd folder, but did not place it out immediately. Some things should arrive only after the room has told you what it is capable of. I made coffee, then poured mine out untouched when I realized my stomach had gone tight. Corinne arrived at 6:12 wearing pearl earrings. "This feels theatrical," she said, taking the folders. "No," I answered. "It feels documented." I asked a direct question first. "Where were you for those 7 days?" She exhaled through her nose like I was boring her. "With a friend." "Which friend?" I asked. "You do not know her." "Try me." She stared at me with open irritation. "Why does the name matter?" "Because lies hate specifics," I said. That made her flinch. She had not expected me to sound like someone who had spent days getting honest in private. Finally, she said, "I was in D.C. for a while." "For a while? With who?" I asked. She did not answer. Instead, she leaned forward and tried a softer voice. "Micah, I have not felt chosen by you in a long time." There was the pivot, not an answer, but indictment. I nodded once because I refused to pretend I was perfect for the comfort of winning. "Maybe I neglected us," I said. "Maybe I got too used to you still being there. But we are not discussing whether I was flawless. We are discussing why you vanished and came home contemptuous." Her eyes changed then. She realized confession would not automatically move me into begging. I slid the statements toward her. "These charges started in September." She did not touch the papers. "These hotel stays line up with your late donor nights. These withdrawals line up with weekends you said Danica needed you." I pushed the second sheet closer. "The jewelry store purchase was $386. You have never spent that on me in one trip in your life." Color rose in her cheeks, but not from shame alone, from being known against her will. "You went through our finances like some detective?" she asked. "Like a husband forced to stop pretending," I said. She looked at the line items, then at me. "Fine," she said finally. "There is someone." I had expected relief when the lie cracked. What I felt instead was exhaustion. Not because the truth hurt more than suspicion, but because suspicion had already done so much of the labor. "His name?" I asked. "Andre." Her voice was low now. "Andre Sutton." The name floated there, ordinary and devastating. Not a monster's name, just a man's. How long? Since the museum fundraiser in October. October. 4 months of my marriage redirected behind my back, while I taught children harmony and came home to dissonance. Corinne started crying then, but even her crying had always been precise. She covered her mouth, looked down, and waited for the tremor to register. I stayed still. "I did not mean for it to become this," she said. He understood me. He listened. I almost asked whether listening required hotel rooms and jewelry, but I knew sarcasm would only stain the truth. "So the 7 days?" I said. She nodded without looking up. "Mostly with him." Mostly. Even then she could not surrender the full sentence. "And the comment when you came home?" She closed her eyes. I was angry. "At me?" I asked. "At everything," she said. "At how trapped I felt. How guilty I felt. At how easy it was with him compared to this house. These expectations. All of it." I leaned back and let her hear the chair scrape. "Easy is for takeout," I said. "Marriage is not easy. It is deliberate." That was probably the closest I came to sounding preachy. But I did not care. Corinne had spent months exchanging deliberateness for thrill, and then wanted to invoice me for the inconvenience of her conscience. "I came back, didn't I?" she said, suddenly defensive again. There it was. "Yes," I said. "That is what exposed you." She stared at me as though I had insulted her, instead of naming a fact. "If you wanted to leave, you could have left cleanly. If you wanted to repair this, you could have started with honesty. But you want to keep a home while trying out a life where you were admired." She wiped her cheeks and looked almost offended by the accuracy. Corinne adored admiration. She liked being the best-dressed woman at the gala, the one men remembered, the one other woman asked about skincare and lipstick shades. Attention fed her far longer than peace did. I pulled out the separation papers then and placed them between us. Her face changed completely. Not because she suddenly understood my pain. Because paperwork is where fantasy loses oxygen. "You already went to a lawyer?" she whispered. "On Friday." "So that was it? You decided without me?" I laughed then, once quietly. "Without you? Corinne, you made major decisions about this marriage in hotel rooms with another man. Do not talk to me about being excluded." She pushed the papers away, as if they were hot. "I do not want a divorce." The sentence hung there, late and oddly entitled. I looked at her hands. Her nails were done in the pale pink I used to pay attention to when we first dated, because details felt like tenderness back then. "I believe you do not want consequences," I said. "That is not the same thing." She stood and paced to the window, peeking through the blinds at the wet street, the neighbor kid dragging a trash bin to the curb. "You are punishing me," she said. "No," I answered. "I am refusing to participate in my own humiliation any longer." That sentence surprised even me. It sounded like somebody who had finally heard himself clearly. She spent the next 20 minutes trying on versions of remorse the way she used to try on coats before a gala. Soft regret, angry regret, philosophical regret. People make mistakes. You were emotionally unavailable. I panicked. I did come back. I chose this house in the end. Each one asked me to meet her halfway across a bridge she had burned from her side. I listened because listening costs less than arguing when your mind is made up. Then I said the only honest thing left. "I do not want to teach you how to respect me after all this." That was the moment she understood I was not bluffing. Her shoulders dropped, and she sat back down with a kind of stunned stillness. "You really can stop loving somebody that fast?" she asked. It was the wrong question, maybe because it came from someone who thought love was a light switch instead of a structure. "No," I said. "Fast is how this looks from your side. From mine, this was taking shape for months. The week you disappeared just stopped me from lying to myself." Outside, a city bus hissed to a stop. The ordinary sound made the room feel even more final. I moved into a furnished short-term apartment in Mount Vernon by the end of that week. It had squeaky floors, one stubborn radiator, and a view of a brick wall that I grew weirdly fond of because it asked nothing from me. My sister Naomi came over with aluminum pans of baked ziti and a bag of clementines, and did not ask stupid questions. Naomi works nights as a respiratory therapist and has no patience for decorative suffering. She stood in my tiny kitchen, looked around, and said, "You look tired, but you do not look confused anymore." It was the nicest thing anybody said to me all month. The consequences did not come like thunder. They came like mail. Asset disclosures. House valuation. Corinne's email about whether we could delay filing until after the museum's spring campaign because she did not want gossip. My answer was no. Her request for one private dinner to talk human to human. My answer was also no. Dana handled what needed handling, and I taught my classes, rehearsed the choir, and learned that grief behaves better when given a calendar. On Saturdays, I started riding the light rail down to Lexington Market just to be around noise that had nothing to do with my own thoughts. The hardest day was not the confession. It was a Saturday I went back for the last of my books and found Corinne in the kitchen making salmon croquettes from her grandmother's recipe. The smell hit me before the sight did, and for one stupid second, I nearly cried from memory alone. She looked up at an old Howard sweatshirt of mine and said, "I thought you'd be later." We both stood there inside a version of domestic life that could have fooled anybody else. That is the cruelty of betrayal. Sometimes it keeps wearing familiar clothes long after its character has changed. She asked if I wanted coffee. I said no. She asked if I was seeing anybody. I said that was not her business. Then she did something unexpected, and because it was unexpected, more painful than the affair. She spoke plainly. "I thought you would be angry longer," she said. "I thought that once you calmed down, you would remember what we built." I set my box of books on the floor and looked at her hard enough that she finally looked away. "I do remember," I said. "That is why I cannot stay. I know exactly what I offered here and exactly what you did with it." She cried for real then, messy and annoyed at herself for it. One hand braced on the counter beside the flower canister labeled "Bless This Home." We had bought that canister at a church rummage sale because it made us laugh. "I did love you," she said, past and present tangled together in her voice. "I think part of you still loves me," she added, almost desperate. "Love is not the point anymore," I said. "Character is." I had not planned to say that, but once it came out, it stayed in the room with a firmness that made both of us straighten around it. The divorce finalized in May. Spring had come all at once. Trees greening the parkways, people opening windows, church ladies changing from old hats to bright silk scarves. Dana called with the news while I was tuning the sanctuary piano before Wednesday rehearsal. "It is done," she said. Those 3 words made me sit down on the bench and stare at middle C like it might offer commentary. I expected collapse or triumph. What I felt was unclenching, like I had been holding a note too long and finally been given permission to breathe. After rehearsal, I drove nowhere in particular and ended up by Druid Hill Park. Life after betrayal is rarely cinematic. It is administrative, then domestic, then quietly revealing. I learned I liked my eggs scrambled softer than Corinne did. I learned I slept better without a television on. I started running again in the mornings because nobody was there to complain that the alarm ruined the mood of the apartment. In June, I accepted a summer curriculum fellowship in Chicago, which was something I had avoided while married because Corinne said long-distance seasons were for people with unstable foundations. I remember packing and realizing the foundation had never been far away. It had been honesty. Chicago gave me lake wind, elevated trains, and the useful anonymity of the city where no coffee shop held my history. I rented a studio in Bronzeville with tall windows and spent my days writing music curriculum and my evenings walking past brownstones and corner stores and boys dribbling basketballs under flickering lights. I did not become a new man there. That is another lie people tell. You stay yourself, just with fewer negotiations against your own dignity. Naomi visited one weekend, and we ate catfish at a place with paper napkins and a waitress who called everybody honey. She watched me and said, "You are back inside your face." In August, Corinne sent one last email. No theatrics, no blame, just a paragraph saying she was sorry for weeks she disappeared, sorrier for months before it, and ashamed most of all that she came back talking like my devotion was guaranteed. I read it twice on a bench near the lake. Then I closed my phone and sat with the wind pressing my shirt against my chest. I did not answer right away because I wanted to know whether silence came from maturity or leftover injury. 3 days later, I wrote back one sentence. I accept the apology and still agree with my decision. That answer freed me more than any dramatic speech could have. There was no hidden invitation in it, no secret cruelty, no attempt to make her carry what she had already proven willing to misplace. By then I had started helping an older piano tuner on weekends, a retired man named Reuben who smelled like lemon oil and always wore suspenders regardless of weather. Reuben said, "People think broken instruments need force. Usually they need attention and proper tension." I nearly laughed when he said it because I had built an entire marriage around attention without insisting on proper tension. And that is how strings go flat. I do not tell this story to make myself the spotless husband who got done wrong by a wife too glamorous to appreciate him. I was absent in ways that mattered. I postponed hard talks because I worship peace more than truth. I accepted vague answers because clarity might have cost me the life I had arranged. I thought being steady was enough to keep a marriage upright. It is not. Steadiness without boundaries turns into permission. But none of my failures required cringe choices. That distinction took me months to learn, and maybe saved me from turning her betrayal into a verdict on my worth. Last winter, more than a year after the divorce, I went back to Baltimore for my nephew's school play. Afterward, I drove past the old row house just once. The blue paint on the steps had chipped. The little window box was empty. I did not park. I did not ache. I just looked long enough to honor the version of me who once sat up all week in that living room, waiting for a wife who came back talking like my relief should be grateful and my questions should be small. He deserved better than contempt dressed up as honesty. I am glad he finally agreed. So when people ask what changed me, I do not say the affair. I say the sentence at the door. Be happy I even came back. Because betrayal can still leave room for confusion, rationalization, bargaining, old memories trying to outvote fresh evidence. Contempt clears the room. Contempt tells you exactly what the betrayer believes your love is worth. Mine heard that sentence, smelled another man on his wife's coat, and chose not to audition for dignity any longer. That was the real beginning. Not the end of a marriage, the end of begging for basic respect inside one. If Micah made the right choice, comment, "I choose peace." Like this story, share it with someone who has ever ignored a red flag, and subscribe for more unforgettable relationship drama stories where respect, betrayal, and consequences all come to light. What stays with me from Micah's story is not only the week Corinne disappeared, but the smaller moments that explained it. Him stacking chairs at church and hiding the truth. Him leaving instead of arguing at 1:18 a.m. Him recognizing that "I came back" was not repentance. A lot of damage survives on technicalities. Real accountability begins when you stop confusing someone's return with their respect. The end.